All right, let's look at example 4, and you're going to see function composition again. And there's going to be one difference, and that one difference is we're not going to actually start with a discrete value as our input. You can see that part A says, what is f of g of x? And so instead of this initial input being an actual number, which means we're going to get an actual, number for the output, we're just leaving it as x. So what is f of g of x? Let me bring up what we did before and look at these, function machines here again as the visual. And so let's say that g of x here is 4x plus 5. So I'm going to write that in as 4x plus 5. And then the function after that is f of x, which is 6x minus 2. And I'll put that in blue, 6x minus 2. So the visual of this looks like this. This right here, I'm taking g of x right here. I'm starting with that. And then whatever that output is, I'm going to plug that into f of x, which is this right here. Okay, well, before we started with a number, and it was easy to just like evaluate that number and then bring it down to an actual answer. But here we're just saying, well, what if I plug in x? I'm just going to keep it as g of x. And so the concept is, okay, well, if I plug in x into this function right here, drop it in, and I replace x with x, nothing really changes, right? The output then is just 4x plus 5. So I'm going to take 4x plus 5 would come out, and now I'm going to package that up and put parentheses around it. But then this 4x plus 5 would basically go into my next function, 4x, right there. So let me put that in pink or purple or whatever that is. This 4x plus 5 would be substituted into this x value right here. So what would come out is 6 times 4x plus 5, and then minus 2. So it's really just, it's almost just like substitution that you've done in like, chapter 2 or chapter 3. We're taking one function and or one expression basically, and plugging it into the other x for that. Kind of like when we did substitution for when we solved systems of equations. So if I wasn't doing that, visual example, I would just take f of g of x and say, all right, f of, what's g of x? What happens there? Well, that doesn't change. G of x is equal to 4x plus 5 right here. So I'm going to write this as f of 4x plus 5. Now I'm going to take 4x plus 5 and plug it into f of x, which is 6x minus 2. So I'm going to have 6x minus 2, but again, this x is not going to be just x. I'm going to plug in 4x plus 5 there. So this is going to be like we showed in the like we showed over here. This will be 6 times parentheses 4x plus 5 minus 2. Right? I'm just taking g of x right here and I'm plugging it into f of x. So I'm taking 4x plus 5 and I'm plugging it into this x right here. So I get this substitution. And so now we just have an expression and we know how to operate on these different expressions, and I can reduce and simplify this. So I'm going to multiply this out. This is going to be 24x plus 6 times 5 is 30. Minus 2. I'm going to combine my like terms, so I now have 24x plus 28. So there's my answer, 24x plus 28. All right, g of f of x. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and try it this way. All right, so what's g of f of x? Same thing, I'm just going to do it the other way. I'm going to start with f of x, and I'm going to plug it into g of x. So I'm going to write this as g of, I'm going to look up in my chart here, what is f of x? F of x is 6x minus 2, so it's really, instead of g of x, it's g of 6x minus 2. So I'm going to look at my g of x, and my g of x is 4x plus 5. 4x, right? It's another way to say that is 4 times the input plus 5. The input here, though, is not just x. It's 6x minus 2. So I'm going to plug in 6x minus 2 there. And I have this. So here's my g of x. It's 4x plus 5. 4 times the input plus 5. But that input is basically f of x, right? So I'm substituting 6x minus 2 into the x, and I have a similar situation where I have to simplify this. So let me multiply this out. That's going to give me 24x minus 8 plus 5. So I get 24x minus 3 is my answer there. All right. Let's go ahead and you can, again, pause the video and try these if you want. What's g of x? And what is f of f of x? Okay, so g of x. That means I'm going to take g of x and plug it into itself, right? So g of x, let me just take this. I'm going to look at the innermost parentheses right here. You know, what is g of x? G of x is simply 4x plus 5. So it's 4x plus 5 is what this is right here. But I'm taking that 4x plus 5 and I'm going to plug it into the function that's labeled to the left of it, which is g again. So I'm going to take 4x plus 5 and plug it into 4x plus 5. So this would become 4x plus 5, but instead of my x, I'm really saying 4 times the input, whatever I want to plug in, plus 5. Well, if my input is already 4x plus 5, it looks like this. And now I can multiply this out, and I can simplify as, let's see here, this will be 16x plus 20 plus 5. So this would be 16x plus 25, and there is my answer. All right, D. It looks like kind of a challenge problem. F of x. So I'm basically taking f of x and I'm plugging it into itself twice instead of one time. So what is f of x? F of x is 6x minus 2. And so this is going to look like this. F of, and this is 6x minus 2. 6x minus 2. All right, well, then I'm going to take that 6x minus 2 and plug it into the function to the left of it. All right, so that's going to be 6 times the input minus 2. But the input happens to be 6 minus 2 to start with, right? Because I'm taking the function, plugging it into itself. Now, you could do this, you could finish this by just saying, all right, well, I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to plug it into f again. And I'm going to say this is 6x minus 2. And then I can, you know, that's actually what it is. F of x. But I'm going to make it a little easier on myself by first figuring out what this part is, right? I'm going to simplify that first before I plug it in again to the function. So I'm going to take 6 and multiply this out. This will be 36x minus 12, and then minus 2. So this is 36x minus 14. Okay. So that is f of x. But we'd have to do it one more time if we were to complete this challenge problem. So now I'm going to take this and say this is 6x, 6 times the input, minus 2 one more time. So if I did that, and I multiply this again, this would be 6 times 36. That would be, what, 180 and 36. So 216. So 216x minus 6 times 14, which would be 60 and 24, so 84. And then minus 2. And I could reduce that to 216 minus 86. So if you got 216x minus 86, then you got the right answer.